The REACH campaign was started by the Cheltenham Chamber of Commerce back in 2013, really because it recognised the importance of a fully functioning district general hospital in a town for inward investment, for people wanting to come to the town, for families and so on. It's one of the things that people consider. And so Cheltenham Chamber recognised it as being very important. Hang on. Potted history of it, the current Gloucestershire Hospitals NHS Foundation Trust was formed by a merger of the Gloucestershire Royal and East and the Gloucestershire NHS Trusts in 2002. But since then, there's been a gradual drift of services from Cheltenham, mostly from Cheltenham towards Gloucester. And people may remember the big campaign around the Battle Down Children's Ward, but there have been other campaigns as well around that relocation of services. There have been a few coming back the other way, but the overall drift has been towards Gloucester, particularly for the more acute and serious conditions. The main specialisms in Cheltenham are oncology, because Cheltenham has a world-class cancer centre, urology, cardiovascular care, and a few years ago, very few years ago, they spent £2.3 million on building a new cardio unit there, which is acknowledged nationally as excellent. And then Cheltenham also has an ophthalmic opticianry department. The A&E Department was downgraded to effectively to a minor injury and illness unit overnight in August 2013. That is, that it still operates or operated as a type 1 A&E during the day, but at night it was only a nurse-led minor injuries unit. And that's when REACH was formed. Just a bit about the trust. The annual operating income is 550 million. So we're talking about a big business, if you like, call it as a business. I don't see it as business, it's a service, but it's a very big organisation. Employs around 8,000 people. It has 960 beds across the two hospitals, although a few years ago it had about 1,300 beds. But of course, the lengths of people's stay in hospital is much shorter now than it used to be. So it's not, you can't necessarily equate the two. It's not just a lot of beds, it's actually an improvement in efficiency that has allowed the number of beds to be reduced. There are over 150,000 emergency attendances a year, and I'll come back to that because that relates to the A&E. But 800,000 outpatients appointments each year. And obviously the Acute Trust provides healthcare for the whole of the population of Gloucestershire, but also beyond, so into Herefordshire, Worcestershire, Wiltshire and so on. Some people are referred to Gloucestershire from there. In 2008, there were an average of 8,000 A&E attendances a month, roughly 96,000 a year. But there was a problem with patients being referred to the hospital who had multiple conditions, so they would often end up in the wrong department. So a project called Utopia, rather unfortunately, was used to route all patients through A&E for effectively triage and understanding all of their relevant conditions, so that they were then sent to the right department. Brilliant idea, won all sorts of awards for doing it. But unfortunately, they didn't staff up to cope with that. By 2012, the average A&E attendances were up to an average of around 10,000 a month, or 120,000 a year. So that's a 25% increase over 4 years. Now, we looked into that, and I sat with the finance director for about an hour and a half, and we eventually worked out that roughly half of the increase was a result of the Utopia project. And the rest, the balance was organic growth in the number of people needing A&E. Now, you might think, why are more people going to A&E? Because by and large, we've got health and safety coming out of our ears, and we protect us, and we wrap children in cotton wool. And you'd have thought that and cars are safer, you'd have thought there'd be less people ending up in A&E. But of course, what that doesn't take into account, well, several things, and we'll come to those at the very end, but one of them is the aging population. The population is aging by the older population, who are the ones who most often have falls and get ill when it gets very hot or very cold, is growing by 3 to 4% per annum. That's a sort of compound growth in the people who are most likely to end up in A&E. So there is an organic growth going on anyway, but over and above that, there are other reasons for that happening. Last year, The A&E attendances in Gloucestershire were up to 150,000. It's an average of 12,500 a month, and it peaked in the winter at about 15,000. The result of that is that we've been waiting more and more, longer and longer to get through A&E. Now, I'm not trying to, this just came off the Wikipedia site, so I'm not trying to make a political point here. And one of the things I should make very strongly is the REACH campaign is a cross-party campaign, which has the support of all of the three main parties, Labour, Liberal Dem and Conservative, in Gloucestershire. So it's a cross-party campaign, because we all recognise that if we all sort of start scrapping about it, that's not going to be productive. And I have to say that some of Gloucestershire's MPs have been extremely supportive of the REACH campaign, as have most of the councils, and something like 67 out of 68 of the parish councils in the area covered, which the sort of hinterland, if you like, of Cheltenham Hospital. Just a very quick thing, there's a lot of confusion about what they mean by an A&E department. There's a type 1, which is what is a sort of fully functioning casualty department like you see on television. There's a type 2, which is a specialist one that you don't really need to bother about. And then there's a type 3, which is variously described as a minor injury unit, minor injury and illness unit, and so on and so forth. And there's also a type 4, and there's a bit of dispute, they're very similar. But the main differences are between a type 1 and a type 3. So when people talk about, you've got an A&E department, but if it's a type 3, that means it doesn't deal with the more serious illnesses, and you then have to go to a type 1 department elsewhere. During the Fit for the Future campaign, project that the One Gloucestershire and the Hospital Trust tried to, or held over the last couple of years, they tried to differentiate between what they called emergency care and what they called urgent care. And it was a way of trying to excuse the downgrading of Cheltenham in particular, but and of the way in which people would be treated. The problem is that even emergency consultants can't always tell the difference between urgent care, which is life or limb threatening, emergency care, and urgent care, which is an illness or injury that requires urgent attention, typically same day attention, but is not necessarily life or limb threatening. But it's very often very difficult to tell with, say, an acute stomach pain or acute chest pain, whether it's emergency or urgent care that's needed. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important to have a fully functioning type 1 department, so that somebody can go in there and the expertise is available there and then to diagnose properly, and then give the appropriate treatment. Just a few statistics here. The total number of ambulances, you're talking about sort of 400 a day, typically, or between 300 and 400 ambulances a day arriving at well, now the one hospital. And that's been one of the problems, that instead of going to two A&E departments, they all try to shoehorn those through Gloucestershire Royal during the pandemic. That was done for a very good reason, which was to try and keep Cheltenham a COVID-free green designated hospital. The problem is that Gloucestershire Royal wasn't big enough to cope with the additional workload, which was effectively increased their workload by about 50%. And although they transferred a lot of the staff across, obviously they couldn't, it's not just about the staff, it's also about the capacity, it's about how much space there is for ambulances outside. But more importantly, it's how many beds are there in the hospital that can accept the 60% of ambulance arrivals that are admitted to the wards.
Julius, just say you've got 1 minute to go.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll zip through a couple of others. We're looking at handover breaches. Ambulances should take less than 30 minutes to turn around. They've been taking anything up to 5 hours or more over the last year since Cheltenham was closed. And the hours have been lost to ambulances, and that means on one occasion there were over 30 emergency calls awaiting ambulances arrivals, and there weren't any ambulances available because they were all stuck at GRH. Okay, sorry, that's this is what we come on to in answer to the question which we talked about earlier. about 20% of those 12,500 attendances shouldn't really be at A&E, but the reasons they're there are many reasons, but these are some of them. The primary one is the difficulty of accessing other primary health care services in a timely manner. You phone your doctor, you get an appointment in 2 weeks' time, or if you're lucky, 3 days' time, or whatever. There have been cuts in other services, reduced opening hours at minor injury and illness units, the poor out of hours services for GP cover, the fact you don't need to make an appointment and you should be seen within 15 minutes for a triage and treated within 4 hours. Doesn't always happen, but that's what should be happening. So A&E departments are the default place to go in the event of an illness or accident. And that's why you get so many people going there who perhaps would be better going to their pharmacist or their GP or being seen by somebody else. And unless or until that is addressed, the problems in A&E will not be resolved. Thank you.